Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, in this video, I want to explore the question, okay, a very serious question as to whether there can be a social form of narcissism or an empathic form of narcissism. In other words, let me say it another way. Is it possible that maybe the DSM only identifies an individualistic form of narcissism where they may be missing where the same basic psychological problem arises in people who have empathy and people who are very social? In other words, can there be a social form of narcissism or even an empathic form of narcissism? Okay, so basically, this is where I really want to get to where when you look underneath the DSM criteria, okay, what the real neurology is happening, okay, or the real psychology of narcissism, how that may actually apply to people who are not individualistic, okay, so that maybe the DSM criteria is only capturing only a certain type of narcissist, okay, where the actual problem of narcissism may be very much more widespread and it may be affecting people who are very empathic or even very social. Okay, so let me try to explain. And by the way, I fully accept that there is narcissism. Okay, and I fully accept that the DSM criteria do describe a type of narcissism. So let's get. I'm not resisting that. Okay, but I just want to kind of look underneath the DSM criteria and let's try to see what's really happening psychologically to see if it maybe could also apply to empathic people and to social people, because anybody who's having the problem of narcissism ought to maybe be aware of it and consider ways of getting beyond it, because I think what we're really we're talking about a problem that's affecting people all over humanity. Okay, and it basically is, to me, sort of a hiccup or sort of a limit in our ability to be mature as human beings. Okay, so this is like a maturation issue, and for some people a very serious challenge, because it really gets to the heart of what's very uncomfortable for us. Okay, so if there's a way to sort of approach the frontier of what causes narcissism, okay, then anybody who has that issue, okay, ought to have the opportunity to consider, what it would mean to improve, and that could really, I think, improve just people in general, and not just people who are individualistic. Okay, so I think there's a lot of improvement if you just look at today, like say today's political discourse. How harshly we disagree between the left and the right, how oftentimes people lose friendships or people break down communications just over petty disagreements in the way that we disagree, because often different people bring together different points of view, and those points of view can be very provocative. So in the end, I think what we're really talking about is being being more diplomatic as people and having more flexibility, and also around the question of so-called abuse. Okay, because people do hurt each other. Okay, and so, do we want to be a world of fragile people where we're all we're just sort of enclosed in our, do we all just want to be enclosed in our, sanctuaries of sensitivity, very easily bruising each other? Or do we still want to respect that? Yeah, you don't want to be too abusive. But on the other hand, do we want to be more like athletes who can take a little bit of punishment, like in a sport with like a sportsmanship sort of attitude, or do we want to consider maybe conditioning ourselves to take a little more punishment, not to the point of excessiveness, but do we want to be a little tougher in a sense, and at the same time more flexible? I'm just saying, it's not just individualistic people who have problems. Okay, and so let's talk about what's really going on with narcissism. Okay, and how that may apply even to people who have empathy or who are social. Because I'm going to say right now, I don't believe, and I don't think it's reasonable, that just because you have empathy, just because you are social, that makes you sort of a higher status of a person. Okay, I don't know. I don't think that's true, because you can have empathy and you can be social, and at the same time you can still be very sensitive. You can be immature. Tell me that it's possible to be. Tell me that it's impossible to be immature just because you're social and empathetic. That doesn't make any sense. It is very possible to be immature and to be oversensitive even if you are, let's say, empathetic or social. In fact, I don't think being social or empathetic makes a person any better or any worse than an individualistic person. Okay, so I think we need to take that off the table, and we need to explore what narcissism really is. Okay, because I think a lot of people do have issues with narcissism. Okay, so the way I look at narcissism as a developmental hiccup. It's like a pause in development where we don't make that transition, okay, to being able to take on more discomfort and be able to just walk around with more, just honestly, discomfort, and even it's sometimes even pain. So it's like pain, discomfort, irritation. Okay, we somehow reach a point where we don't cross that bridge to where we can actually carry discomfort. Okay, and what we end up doing is we end up filtering the information that comes into us in life. We end up filtering information, and we end up sort of like manufacturing and sort of concocting like a vision of the world and ourselves that sort of adapts to our inability to carry irritation. Okay, so in other words, to me, narcissism, the fundamental aspect of narcissism is there's some point where we don't make that transition as young people or as adolescents to where we can actually accept that it's okay and actually condition ourselves to carry more irritation and discomfort in just generally in life. Okay. And so what we end up doing is like humans are geniuses. We have like genius elements in our minds, and we have the ability through denial, through dissociation, and through avoidance to sort of filter information and sort of craft how information comes into us, information about ourselves, about other people, about situations, so that it sort of doesn't touch the sensitive areas, so that we sort of don't have to feel too uncomfortable. Okay, or even ways that make us feel gratified. Okay, so it's sort of like selective information filtration. All right. So basically, if you filter information enough, okay, and if you're processing information about the outside world as a way of managing and avoiding discomfort, okay, you're going to slowly start to disengage from an open connection with the outside world. Okay. Now, what does the outside world mean? Okay. The outside world means the broader environment. Okay. So just because you're in a social group, okay, or just because you're empathic and you feel connected to other people, okay, that doesn't mean you necessarily are fully engaged in the broader environment. Okay. Let's try to remember, just because you have a social group is like a cluster. Okay. And just because you're well connected in your social group, that doesn't mean you're fully connected in the broader environment. Okay. Because there's other people out there besides your social group. You know what I mean? So if you're real social and you're really connected to people and you love your friends and you feel what they feel, you may still be in a cluster of people that forms a sort of kind of like a selfhood, but a selfhood composed of many people. So in other words, if you define like the narcissistic ego or narcissism as like an ego or selfhood that is sort of disengaged from the broader environment, okay, from the broader environment, that could also apply to social groups, right? Or even you could see it in politics. Like you look at countries, you have some countries that together collectively, they act narcissistic with regard to other countries. Okay, we see that all the time. I think the United States has that problem sometimes. I think other countries have that problem. I've seen it, between different countries. So if we can broaden our sense of the ego, not just to apply to individualists, but also to apply to even maybe very social groups or maybe very empathic groups, factions, cohorts, schools, you can see that the problem of narcissism is not necessarily limited only to individualists. Okay. So in other words, I could be very empathic, I could be very social, I could be connected, but I could still be sort of very comfortably within my social environment. And there may be things outside that social environment, maybe other types of people, other situations, maybe other concerns that are outside of my social comfort zone, okay, that I kind of don't really get too in touch with because I'm so comfortable in my social group. Okay. So if you see a person, or if you yourself experience that your social interactions and your empathy and your network of good people and comfort zone, if you sort of stay nested in that as sort of like a way of protecting yourself, and you sort of avoid too much contact outside of that, okay, that to me is getting disengaged from the broader environment, okay, and that to me is narcissism. And the reason why it's so important is because we're all sort of managing and protecting and maintaining sort of maybe an unnatural comfort baseline, okay, a baseline that's maybe unnaturally comfortable. And that if we're really going to be, let's say, useful people, okay, and if we're going to have any diplomacy whatsoever, and if we're going to have any interaction between different pockets, individuals, groups, whatever, and we're going to have, if all those pockets can sort of interact with more flexibility and more diplomacy, we're all going to have to take on a little more discomfort and not be so much in our comfort zones. You know what I mean? Our little comfort tribes, or whatever, our little worlds. You know what I mean? And I don't think we want to have a world where everybody's like in their separate world, all being comfortable, and we're so comfortable that we don't really have the fortitude and the conditioning to sort of deal with what's on the outside, okay, and engage with it by taking on the discomfort, not just being in our comfort zone, okay. So in that sense, I think narcissism applies to anybody who finds themselves in a situation where they're in sort of like a little enclave, or a little place, a little cluster, a little cell, or whatever, where they're sort of, whether they're social or not, they're like in their happy place, their comfort zone, and they just tend not to extend out of it too much, and they tend to kind of stay within and filter information to sort of be consistent with their own little subculture, because that essentially is managing and maintaining maybe too much comfort, okay. And what I'm saying is that just like a person with NPD who's diagnosable, they're faced with that challenge to maybe take on very seriously, like what it means to live with more discomfort as a baseline, and to just purposely get more engaged with the outside world, okay, much more engaged with what's outside your comfort zone, okay. So I propose that, we should take the DSM seriously, because the DSM is informed by, decades of data, and it is, the result of a lot of observation of real patients and stuff. But there may be some political biases, maybe in psychology. Maybe psychology is kind of a little bit biased towards empathy and a little biased towards being social. Okay, maybe that's just a political, cultural baggage, maybe from the people that maybe have maybe created psychology as we know it. Maybe psychology comes out of traditions that are very, let's say, leftist, socialist, very empathic oriented, maybe even cultures. And so we want to make sure that we don't just swallow maybe everything that just comes out of psychology as though it's just the 10 commandments off Mount Sinai. You know what I mean? There has to be also maybe some insight that there may be some gaps. There may be some gaps in how we categorize mental illnesses or personality disorders. Maybe those gaps are maybe due to, just some political baggage that has to do with, just political baggage around the subculture of psychology. Okay. So that if we really think about it, the actual psychological phenomenon of narcissism, of getting too much in the comfort zone and filtering our environmental information to be sort of consistent with our comfort zone, or our comfort world, our subworld, or our subculture, and sort of limiting our interaction and our engagement with things that are outside. Okay, that psychological phenomenon actually applies also to a lot of people who are social, and a lot of people who are empathic. Okay, so we can sort of stop looking at just the fact that you have empathy, or just the fact that you are social, as being, oh, you check the box, you're a great person. It's like, no, there's more to it. We should also consider, the thing that's missing in the narcissist, okay, which is not really the fundamental thing that's missing in the narcissist is not whether or not they have empathy. Okay, the fundamental thing that's missing in the narcissist is they're filtering information, and they're enclosing themselves okay, in a place where they're managing too much their comfort and they're avoiding what's a turnoff or a discomfort to them. So we all can come out of our turtle shell, and that turtle shell is kind of like the narcissism that we're all dealing with, or a lot of people are dealing with. So I really think that it'd be nice to get beyond maybe some of the biases in psychology and to look at how the phenomenon of narcissism actually really is occurring in people who do have empathy, or some people, not all, but some people who do have empathy, or some people who are social and they have a real narcissistic process. Because just like the NPD person, they become too comfortable and they become habituated to too much of a comfort zone in their let's say in their comfort, sort of like the little subculture that feels good to them. You know what I mean? And that there's always an outside. Okay, you could be the most social person, you could be a social butterfly, you have all these friends, you feel for everybody, but there's some outside area that you're not, possibly, that you're not really going into, because that would be really distasteful. You know what I mean? So I think we all can answer to that. you know and and sometimes, just because you're a little bit social and just because you're empathic, you may overestimate how good of a person you are. And that sounds like a narcissism, overestimating how good you are. Okay. And we see it all the time. People who, just because they're empathic, just because they're social, they just kind of feel as though they're on a little higher level, that they're blessed to be so good, and that's because they're buying on this false assumption that the real criteria for being a good person is whether or not you have empathy or whether or not you're social. I'm saying there's a level of maturity that's even beyond that I think is maybe more the real test of how good we are, or how developed and mature we are as people. I don't think it's helpful to talk about people being good and bad, because I think humans are actually pretty bad, actually, in a lot of ways. But I think it's much better to talk about how mature we are and how extended we are into our engagement with the world, and how maybe we sort of deflate that ego of being maybe too caught up in whatever our little pocket of comfort is. You know what I mean? So yeah, I would encourage people to really see the narcissistic problem as affecting potentially anybody, regardless of whether you have empathy, regardless of whether you're social or not. Okay. Just imagine, like, say, if you're some extremely, social, successful social, empathic person. You might be like an excellent therapist. You might be an activist in, the Democratic Party. You might be involved in, like, social justice and all this stuff. But just ask yourself, if maybe you spend too much time sort of with your own people and people that agree with you, in sort of like your little subculture, you know what I mean? And ask yourself, if maybe there's an extended world out there, people have different points of view, different worldviews, maybe just different aspects of the environment that are outside your little, your area of comfort. And I think all of us can answer to that, And I think, the answer is, I think all people have to take on more discomfort as a baseline. Okay. And not just discomfort just to feel discomfort. It's not masochism. It's not sadism. It is because we've committed to getting more engaged in the actual outside world. Okay. Not just the comfort zone world, not just picking and choosing the parts of the world that we feel most comfortable. Okay. Regardless of how sociable or empathic we are, there's always an outside that is probably not an area we're that interested in, as a reminder that we could get more engaged in the broader world. Okay. And sacrificing our comfort for that. Okay. Because, and here's the final thing, I think this is the missing secret, that I think human beings are meant to carry more discomfort than what we think. Okay. And I think just like an athlete who gets conditioned physically to take on a lot more punishment, a lot more discomfort, I think there are a lot of a lot of hidden rewards that we can't even imagine, that come from actually letting ourselves take on more discomfort and letting that be a baseline. Because I think that opens up different dimensions of our metabolism, and I think it makes us healthier as people. Okay. Not just mentally, but physically. Okay. And I think also it develops more wisdom in the way we think and the way we process. which will allow us more flexibility and more dynamism and more we'll become more sorry we'll become more diplomatic, effectively diplomatic with people, and be able to relate to each other better. So I think there's just only benefits to be gotten from this special type of maturity that comes from carrying as a baseline more discomfort because we're more engaged in the outside world. Okay, engaged in the outside world. And remember, it's never pain just for the sake of pain. It's pain because we've accepted that pain, because we're committed to more engagement with the broader outside world, which will cause pain. It will cause discomfort because it'll bring in more dissonance into our table, the table of our soul. And so, we shoulder that, we bear that as an environmental taxation. And I think we will be rewarded for that because I think it opens up a broader metabolic process mentally and physically. So, yeah. So the punchline, or I guess the summary of this video is, I think that, the psychological problem of narcissism, I think, does also apply to people potentially who have empathy or who are social. Okay, so I think that it would be helpful to redefine narcissism as a sort of a process of forming an ego or a selfhood, whether in individual or collective. Okay, which ends up sort of creating sort of a comfort zone subculture, or an individualistic separation, where you become sort of disengaged from the broader environment. Okay, because we're not adapted to more discomfort as people. Now, that, to me, that's a good definition of narcissism, and I think it applies to more people than we think. So I really appreciate you watching this, and thanks for watching, and wishing everybody the best.